Hello and welcome to Historic Games and Such. Today we will be chatting about a historic misconception, doing our first video of historic misconceptions on the Spartans. Growing up, idealized the Spartans, believed that they were really the best soldiers ever and were perfect idols to look up to, having grown up in America with a family that has a heavy history in military, and I thought that they were just the perfect soldiers. But then I started studying history, and I quickly learned that just about everything I know about the Spartans is not really true. And so I thought maybe I would share some of these things with you guys. As always, I do perform research before each video. However, everything I say may not be perfectly accurate. With that being said, this topic specifically is one that I have studied extensively under some of the best professors in ancient history, so take from it what you will. Throughout this video, I will cut to a video of myself playing Rome Total War 2. I do not have the Spartan expansion, so the gameplay that I show is of Macedon fronting as Sparta, fighting Massilia, which is kind of fronting more as Arcadia, which I'll talk about in the video. Hopefully this video doesn't go on for too long, but I have no guarantees there. I love this topic, I love talking about this topic, so time might get away from me. Make sure to click the bell icon after subscribing to be able to get notifications when new videos are uploaded, and then let's get right into it with a little bit of word study. Historically, Spartans did not call themselves Spartans. Other Greek city-states commonly called them Lacedaemonians, and Spartans called themselves homoioi, which I'll explain a little bit later in this video. The term Spartan comes from the three main levels of Spartan society, the top of which being the Spartiates, the free citizens of the land. The other two being the Perioikoi, the free but non-citizens, and the Helots, the non-free inhabitants. I don't know where the algorithm lies on that real term, so I'll just go with that. Other Greeks and modern people look at the three groups as Sparta as a whole. The issue is the Spartiates did not view the others as Spartans, hence the term homoioi. And with homoioi, you may recognize that prefix homo meaning the same. Homoioi is just the Greek plural of that word, so the best translation of that would be the equals, is what the Spartans called themselves. Spartans believed that they themselves were the descendants of Heracles, and they believed every citizen was no more or less important than the next. And they all, including the kings, yes, there were two kings at all times, lived exactly the same. This is one of the many things that the movie The 300 misses entirely. P.S. It is not even close to being historically accurate, outside of using a few quotes. No Spartan had any job, other than the males were soldiers, and the females were weavers and technically managers of farms, but not officially. They were able to operate as a society because Spartiates made up a ridiculously low percentage of the people in Sparta. Estimates go as low as, at times, just 5 to 10% of the population. This meant the Perioikoi, the free non-citizens, did the skilled labor, and the Helots, the non-free people, worked the fields and the farms. So yeah, the Spartans were a slave society. Oh well. Anyway, they were a ruling class minority that existed of the labor of mass amounts of slaves. Meaning the Spartiates never had to work, and everyone received an equal amount of the product. So yes, they were a complete socialist nation that existed not by sharing, but because of slavery. Looking at the government, things don't get better. Sparta had two kings, but the real rulers were the Gerousia, which was made up of 28 elder Spartiates. They had to be over 60 years old, as well as the two kings making up 30. These 30 men decided everything. Erusea were technically voted into office by a voice vote that was judged by a small group of people in a neighboring building so that they didn't know what candidate people were shouting for. However, to be eligible, candidates had to come from a few wealthy and influential families, and these positions were held for life. They acted as a Supreme Court with power to overturn any and all legislation and try anyone, including the kings themselves. But in reality, they just vetoed every piece of legislation that didn't come from them. So they, in reality, decided everything. So far, we have a slave society of communist oligarchs that are deified by so many Americans. And Spartans also, funny enough, were completely illiterate. Yes, every single person in Sparta was illiterate. School taught exercise, and for the boys, warfare, and for the girls, sewing. That is it. We only know what we know of the Spartans because of other Greek city-states writing about the Spartans, which is why we also hear primarily the most about their soldiers and their warfare, because that's what the others wrote about. A few scholars were allowed to come in and write while they were visiting Sparta, and from those, that's where we get a lot of this other detail. Sparta did not have any real culture. They didn't make paintings. They didn't write anything. Their only stories were of soldiers and youth being taught to be extremely problematic in reality. There's extreme soldiers and everything of the sort. And that was it. That was all they had. Can it get worse than this? Yeah. By a lot. Like, a lot. Spartan men only focused on war. And not necessarily to challenge other nations. They did that, but not very often. They trained every day for their entire lives, forming one of, if not the first professional army to be able to put down slave revolts. Because again, they only made up 5 to 10% of the population. The slaves could overthrow them, so that's what they trained fighting for, was to put down these revolts. And this fighting style of ancient Greece used hoplites in a phalanx formation. This was a nearly impenetrable wall of shields and armor and spears. As long as no one runs away, this was a devastating and terrifying thing for phalanxes. If just one person on the front row died or ran away or was too slow, didn't keep in step with the rest, and their position wasn't immediately filled by the next person behind them, the entire formation could break, resulting in not only the loss of the battle, but a complete rout and mass slaughter would ensue as the fleeing army's backs weren't protected by the large shields. To avoid a soldier dying, they trained their whole lives, and they were equipped with some of the best armor of all time. Well, for that time. And to rant quickly on the movie 300, the Spartans depicted without the breast armor are light hoplites, which did exist, but Sparta pretty much never used them in combat. Hoplites had either Hollywood's favorite bronze chest piece, or much more commonly, they had the linothorax, which is a linen layered breast piece, which actually one of my professors in college accurately recreated one, which was one of the first times I think it was ever done successfully. And a student volunteered after rigorous testing to be shot by Dr. Aldrete, my professor, with a bow and arrow while he was wearing the armor. There are pictures of this, and I will try to find one for you guys. It's insane, but absolutely love Dr. Aldrete. My favorite professor I've ever had so far. Anyway, back to the bad stuff. To avoid having the Spartans flee from battle, they taught them, or more so brainwashed them, to honor death in combat and glorify war and demonize cowardice to an absolute. But even the illiterate Spartans knew that cultural values and brainwashing wasn't enough to guarantee their soldiers weren't going to flee. So, as all the boys were forced into military school at the age of 7, they were not allowed to see ever a woman. And they were forced into same-sex relations with their fellow soldiers, and they were brainwashed to believe that this was the natural way of things, to the point that most Spartiates were disgusted by women. Now, I clearly do not have anything against the LGBTQ plus community. However, I do have a lot against conversion therapy, whether that be to convert people to being straight or to brainwash people into being gay. Don't like it either way. But then how do they have children, I hear you immediately asking? Only by the worst thing ever. The Gerousia, that group of 30 old guys, would choose a 30-year-old male and an 18-year-old girl to be married. No choice, completely arranged marriages. And then they would take the girl, shave her head, dress her in male's clothing, put her in a dark room, then tell the man that he had to go into that room and rape the person inside. Congrats to the loving couple, you are now married. The woman would then be given a piece of land and some slaves to work it, and the man would just return to his barracks. That was marriage in ancient Sparta. The men were banned from seeing their wives again until they retired from the military at 60 years old. Most of them didn't want to see them anyway, but those that did had to sneak away in the middle of the night to try and find their wives and visit with them. Now, obviously, this system does not result in many pregnancies. But luckily, any person born by a Spartan woman was assumed to have been fathered by the husband, and definitely not the slaves that they worked with all day and every day. Now, if she was found to be having relations with others that weren't her husband, that would clearly be bad for her, but often the husbands just didn't care. Now, why? Why force all of your men to be gay? Well, you wouldn't want to flee from battle, ensuring your friend's death. So therefore, you especially wouldn't flee from battle if that meant your lover would perish. Really messed up way of looking at things, really just terrible in every way. So altogether, Spartans were illiterate, conversion therapied into being gay, slaving, communist, oligarchic rapists, who are still revered by American men everywhere. Why? Because they were good at fighting? They were the best soldiers of all time. No. They weren't even the best soldiers in Greece at that time. Just north of Sparta, in that same kind of peninsula island off of the south of Greece, was Arcadia. Here, the terrain was way too extreme for large cities, so the population was made up mostly of small goat-herding communities. Greece at the time was blessed with amazing crop yields and had constant booming populations. It doesn't take a whole lot of people to herd goats, so instead many Arcadian men worked full-time as mercenaries. Mercenaries for other Greek states, yes, including Sparta, as well as other lands such as Persia. Look up the March of the 10,000. Which is the single most badass thing to have ever occurred in my opinion. I will definitely be making a video on that. And once a small city town in Arcadia refused to pay their taxes to Sparta, so Sparta marched on them with 40,000 heavy hoplites. Spartan heavy hoplites. Arcadia band together and produced almost 11,000 Arcadian mercenaries. Sparta was heavily defeated, even though they outnumbered the Arcadians 4-1. Spartans trained all day and fought every few years against hardly armed, untrained, revolting slaves. Arcadians, however, fought all year against trained armies from around the world. I would argue there's never been better soldiers than Arcadians, not the Spartans. So yeah, Sparta sucks. Americans are undereducated. If you liked the video, like the video, comment, subscribe, hit that bell, and bye!